in the light of the COVID-19, the pandemic could lead to what we can call the lockdown generation. Millions of youth are faced with this situation. They are not working, they don't go to school, they are not being trained, and we have a lot to do at the policy level to ensure that support to young men and women in rural areas are commensurate with the challenges faced. For this fourth dialogue on gender equality and resilient food systems, we wanted to hear the youth. What are their aspirations? What are the challenges that they meet? How do they adapt to this new context? And what are the solutions that they propose? The panelists today, young parliamentarians, young farmers, young members of civil society, are actual change agents, and they're working to highlight the potential of youth to be considered as key players for the transformation of the rural area and the fight against poverty. I would like to call upon Mr. Dr. Robert Gay for his opening remarks. I would like to introduce him. Robert Gay is the Sovereign Coordinator for West Africa. He represents Senegal FAO. He exercises as coordinator for genetic evolution of rice and head of product in Cote d'Ivoire. Mr. Gay has a doctorate in genetics and plant improvement enhancement. I give you the floor. Thank you, Francine. I hope you can see me. I would like to greet all of you this morning.
Honorable guests and panelists, ladies and gentlemen, it is an immense pleasure to give the opening remarks for this important webinar organized as part of the activities of the network of ECOWAS Parliamentarian and Gender and Investment in Agriculture and Food Security, with the International Institute for Sustainable Development and Oxfam, in collaboration with Women in Law in Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the issue of harnessing the demographic dividend in Africa. As recently mentioned by FAO Director General during the Regional Conference for Africa, held on 26 to 28 October, Africa's demographic dividend has tremendous potential to transform the supply and demand of future goods and services, including in agriculture and food industry. Harnessing this demographic dividend is paramount. The inclusion of young women and men in agri-food productive activities, wage or self-employment in and off farm is key to increase the generational turnover, foster the sector competitiveness and the vitality of rural areas. In the ministerial declaration approved at the FAO Regional Conference, delegates from 48 countries committed to accelerate the transformation of African agriculture and agri-food systems, including through innovation and digital technologies. Young women and men are indeed best placed to rejuvenate the sector, acquire the knowledge and skills needed to innovate, uptake new technologies, and spearhead the digital transformation. They can drive change and ensure the transition to more sustainable production and consumption patterns that are needed to achieve the goals of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and Feed the World. Concerning enabling youth participation in agri-food systems and policy making, let's note that both the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and the African Union Agenda 2063 made strong commitment to empower young women and men. This meant to be achieved by increasing youth access to productive resources, services, and local institutions, and providing them with decent employment and income generating opportunities. Promoting more and better jobs for young women and men in agri-food systems is also an urgent priority explicitly acknowledged by Africa's governments. Already in 2014, through the African Union Malabo Declaration on Accelerated Agriculture Growth and Transformation for Shared Prosperity and Improved Livelihoods, member states committed to create jobs opportunity for at least 30% of youth in agriculture value chain. Commitment has been growing in the region as testified by the 2017 African Development Bank Strategy Job for Youth in Africa and the AU African Youth Charter. Let me share with you some information on the situation of young people in Africa. This region has the youngest population in the world, with 60% of its population aged below 24. The youth represent 20% of the total population. 218 million people are aged between 15 and 24. Projections suggest that youth in the region will continue to grow and could reach 30% of the world's youth by 2050. This high proportion of youth presents a great opportunity for harnessing a potential demographic dividend in Africa compared to other regions, but also present economic and social challenges which can lead to political instability or conflict. The labor market has a very low capacity to offer productive employment opportunities to young people. Youth unemployment rate are 30% in Northern Africa and 9% in Sub-Saharan Africa. Another major concern is the engagement of young people in hazardous work. Worldwide, 71% of child labor is found in the agriculture sector, with 108 million boys and girls engaged in child labor in crop production, livestock, forestry, fisheries, or aquaculture, often working long hours and facing occupational hazards. Still too often, younger youth or children aged 14 to 17 are not acknowledged in policies and intervention targeting the heterogeneous group of youth, even they are above the minimum age of employment. Ladies and gentlemen, FAO recognizes that empowering young women and men is a key area of action to assist member countries in the transition to more inclusive and sustainable agri-food system. The policy guide, Transforming Food and Agriculture to Achieve the SDGs, 20 Interconnected Action to Guide Decision Maker, was endorsed by the FAO Regional Conference for Africa last 26 to 28 October 2020, and provided a roadmap to support national objectives in the context of the 2030 Agenda. In particular, FAO strives to support member countries in the development of youth-centered agriculture and rural development policies, as the organization recognizes the importance of an enabling environment for young women and men to access productive and decent work opportunities. FAO is therefore strongly committed to support the active participation of rural young women and men in policy formulation, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. FAO has been supporting various initiatives in Kenya, Senegal, Tanzania, Uganda, Nigeria, Namibia, and Rwanda, actively engaging rural youth in multi-stakeholder technical working group or policy dialogue on agri-food system. Working with and strengthening youth organizations as well as informal groups of young farmer champions or agripreneurs, is a key strategy to enable more inclusive consultation and decision-making in the agri-food sector. Therefore, FAO partners with young or youth network and organizations to amplify their voices in the policy and decision-making space. The participation of representatives of national and local associations of rural youth in this webinar today, including, for instance, the Young Farmer Champions Network from Uganda and the Conseil National de la Jeunesse from Senegal, alongside honorable members of parliament, is a clear sign of FAO's commitment to bridge existing gaps and facilitate fruitful interactions. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, let's look at the concern of designing youth-inclusive COVID-19 responses. The economic downturn caused by COVID-19 is hitting already fragile context in Africa. The region was already off track to meet SDG 2 and the AU Malabo target. And the pandemic has made the situation even worse. Economic activities is predicted to contract by 2.8%, and the nourishment could increase by up to 40 million people in 2020 because of the COVID-19. The vulnerabilities of youth and children have been amplified by the pandemic. Young people represent a large majority of the workforce in the informal economy. Therefore, they are often enabled to benefit from formal safety nets or financial relief packages. Young women are also hit by secondary impact of the outbreak as their caregiving duties grow and the quarantine measures increase the risk of domestic violence. The economic stress on families also put girls and boys at greater risk of exploitation, child labor, and gender-based violence. Ladies and gentlemen, recognizing that rural youth has been disproportionately affected, FAO prioritized young farmers and agripreneurs in the COVID-19 response and recovery umbrella program, with the aim of leveraging additional resources. Ongoing FAO's project has also been adapted to the COVID-19 crisis with stronger uptake of distance learning and short-term responses to protect young rural and migrant workers, mask, glove, information, sector-specific operating procedures, and sustain the livelihood, including input, skills, and green job creation. Overall lessons learned from the COVID-19 crisis point us to the need to make rural young women and men's voice heard and engage them further in shaping the response. Policies and strategies often fail to listen and account to heterogeneity of youth, so cannot meet the complex and multifaceted needs. Invest further in distance learning and digital innovation, leveraging young people's talent and enthusiasm towards new technologies. Boost support to youth entrepreneurs for more resilient business. Youth-led agribusinesses are part of the response to the youth employment challenge, yet a stronger enabling environment is needed to accompany the youth. To confirm once more that the inclusive transformation of rural economies and agri-food system would not be successful without fully engaging young women and men. FAO will continue to strive in this direction. With these few words, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you very much for your attention and I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Merci beaucoup pour vos
Thank you for your opening remarks. This meeting will be moderated by Joseph Sinonika. We have called upon youth for this meeting. Joshua Sena is to transform youth to champions of the environment in the Sahel region. He is a journalist by training, and he launched his first radio program in '88 and made it possible for students to talk about their problems and then to change it into a program on the environment. And there is for access to environment. In 2011, he created the Volunteers for Environment. He's now the director, and he deals with the protection of environment and the promotion of youth. SENA has put in place a system of community development for Benin, Togo, to denounce the poor construction of dams. I leave you in Sena's hands, and he may now take the floor. Sena, you have the floor.
Voilà, nous avons cette surprise, donc peut-être d'un mauvais réseau de sa part.
Because of a poor network, we cannot hear Sena. I will call upon Francesca Dalla Valle, who is from the FAO program and specialist for youth employment within the UN system for food, agriculture, supports policy activities that are specific to youth and employment at the world level, as well as in the context of development and stability. I'll now call upon Francesca to do her presentation that will allow us to outline the challenges facing young people with regards to employment. Francesca, kindly take the floor.
Thank you, Francine, and thank you, Mr. Guay, for setting the scene earlier on. We have a presentation, so we can share the screen for this. Okay, thank you. We can already go to the next slide. Here, we wanted to show the different mechanisms that we have in FAO to engage with the youth. So internally, we have an FAO Youth Committee. In September 2019, the FAO Director General launched the Youth Committee, which is an internal body, although not looking at the programmatic areas of FAO. The committee has been created with the aim to tap into the potential of FAO's young employees to create a more dynamic workforce and to share experiences and innovative ideas with the organization, and also serves as an intergenerational dialogue platform among young and, let's say, more adult colleagues. Another mechanism is our COAG Rural Youth Action Plan. The FAO conference in 2019 endorsed the call and request to develop a corporate rural youth action plan that addresses the importance of making rural areas more attractive for young people. And in 2020, the developed work plan was presented to the COAG, which is one of FAO's governing bodies comprising over 100 member nations, was endorsed, and it is now our 5 years action plan on rural youth concerned activities. It is worth noting that the action plan was developed in an open, consultative and participatory way with multiple UN agencies, but also youth networks like for example, the major group of children and youth, and also the young professionals for agricultural development. Going into more external mechanisms used by FAO to engage young people, we have the UNID, which is the Interagency Network on Youth Development. FAO is a member of the UNID since 2012. And the network is co-chaired by 3 chairs, of which one is actually youth-headed. And the overall work of the network is to facilitate and support youth involvement in the UN system and overall all its initiatives, as well as to implement the global strategy on youth. We have also the ECOSOC Youth Forum, once a year, the ECOSOC, which is one of the 6 principal organs of the UN responsible for coordinating the economic and social fields of the overall United Nations system, organizes a specific forum in collaboration with all the UN entities, including the FAO, to engage youth representatives, collect their perspectives on specific topics, to then formally inform the high-level political forum in the context of the SDGs globally. The third one is the Decent Jobs for Youth Global Initiative. The initiative is ILO-led. FAO has been supporting the overall strategy behind the initiative and leads jointly with the ILO the thematic area of youth in the rural economy, while engaging young entrepreneurs in different annual conferences to maximize the effectiveness of youth employment investments. Next slide, please. So we wanted to show the increasing and expanding continental program that FAO has in support of specific youth-related projects. We started our visual mapping from the years 2000 to 2003, although even earlier than that, FAO was supporting youth-related activities or overall inclusion of youth in programs. So in those years, 2000 to 2003, we had 3 projects in Africa, which were specifically targeting young women and men, with 2 out of 3 were more on the emergency side. So they were supporting ongoing DDR programs and the reintegration of child soldiers and immobilized young combatants. Further, in the years 2004 to 2010, we had a further expansion, also due to the development in 2004 of our methodology called Junior Farmer Field and Life Schools, which is an offshoot of the FAO vast program called Farmer Field Schools, which looks specifically at both adolescents and youth, and depending on the request that we had from governments, the methodology has been tailored to different contexts. We had a further slight increase in expansion in the years 2011 to 2017, to then jump into the ongoing year, so 2020, in which we are currently covered 19 countries in Africa with 23 dedicated projects prioritizing topics like decent rural employment, green jobs, agripreneurship, but also child labor prevention and the nexus between child labor and youth employment, and skills development for youth. So this overall expansion, it does not only show the FAO's commitment towards young women and men, but also, as we work at the request of member countries, the increased attention that countries have towards youth. Next, please. This is just an example of 4 out of the many we have of our main regional programs in Africa. The first one is a joint program between FAO and UNIDO, also in partnership with the African Union, running in 6 different African countries with the aim of creating decent on and off farm employment opportunities for African youth in the agri-food sector. Second one is our FAO's integrated country approach, aiming at boosting decent jobs for youth in the agri-food systems and running in its ongoing phase. There have been different phases before, in 4 African countries and 1 in Central America, Guatemala. The third one is FAO's Green Jobs for Rural Youth program, running in 2 countries in Africa and 1 in Asia, Timor-Leste. And last one is newly approved, which is basically starting its implementation in this month. And it's the FAO's Building Resilience in the Sahel region through job creation for youth, which is running in the G5 Sahel countries and aiming also at bridging humanitarian development and peace nexus. It is worth noting that besides this last one mentioned, that it is already starting its implementation now, so during the COVID-19 pandemic, the first 3 projects were designed and started their operations, some before and some much before the pandemic. And they have all managed to readapt their modus operandi to still function during the pandemic and readjust some of the activities to address the very urgent needs of the moment. Next. So we can slide further into the main topic, so rural youth and the COVID-19 pandemic, and more precisely how the COVID-19 pandemic affected rural youth in respect of selected topics. For example, in terms of education, vocational education and training, we know that the pandemic has shifted education from a more traditional face-to-face learning to online. And these interruptions can have or may have had long-term consequences for the young cohorts and are likely to further increase the inequalities for rural youth. As we have been observed and assessed from previous health emergencies, like the most recent Ebola outbreaks, the impact on education, vocational education and training is likely to most negatively affect countries with already low learning outcomes and high dropout rates, and also low resilience to shocks. And in particular in developing countries, given that distance learning remains out of reach for those without the means to connect. So what are the consequences in respect of employment? Generally speaking, further experience that we have shows that younger workers are often the first ones to have their working hours cut or to be laid off their work. Also, rural young people, in particular young women, are highly vulnerable since most of them are likely to be employed in the informal economy. And they are low paid, less secured, and they have less protected jobs and are more likely to live in working poverty. Further, rural youth which are aged between the ages of 15 to 17, which are, yes, within the youth age frame, but also within the children age frame, are, owing to the overall risk of increased poverty, at a greater risk of exploitation and therefore child labor, in particular in the agricultural sector. Going into gender, is the impact of COVID-19 gender neutral? And the answer is obviously no. As assessed in diseases outbreaks, they increase women's and also young women's duties in caring for the elderly and the ill family members, as well for children in the family, and also siblings were out of school during those pandemic periods. And therefore, they may be hit further by secondary impacts of the outbreak. Quarantine measures.
Bonjour, tout va bien?
Can you hear the moderator now, Aluka? He's asking.
Well, I can hear. I can hear, I can continue the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, and if you can slow down too for the interpreter. Thank you.
Okay. Quarantine measures imposed in the different countries as a response to the pandemic are putting or have put already some women at a higher risk of domestic violence, while cutting them off from essential protection services and also social networks. Further, the subsequent economic stress on families, also due to the fact that many of the women and young women being in the informal sector are not managing to access safety nets. And therefore, the inability to access food due to the outbreak is extremely high. And this can put adolescent girls and young women at a greater risk of exploitation, child labor, and gender-based violence. There is also, many other youth groups like indigenous youth, adolescents, youth in humanitarian crises, young migrants, young refugees, young people with disabilities and other different minorities which are potentially marginalized and in fragile situations, they may be or have been exposed to even further vulnerabilities. These youth may experience the highest degree of socioeconomic marginalization due to factors such as their lack of access to effective surveillance and early warning systems, and also health services. As they can be also further socially isolated if they don't access their communities regularly through either employment or education, for example. And last but not least, youth voices. Too often, rural young people's voice is not heard, so during the different dialogues or processes. And so their already complex and different needs are not met. The pandemic may have limited even further their inclusion and potential contribution to related processes and the design of instruments to support them during the time of outbreak, but also thereafter. Next. No, there's one before. Yeah, thank you. So going into the very specific effects of rural young women and men in agri-food systems, to better understand the impact of the pandemic on young people in agri-food systems, FAO launched a youth engagement initiative through an online survey, which was initiated by FAO's IGA program and then extended in further countries by our FAO Regional Office for Africa. We have collected all those impacts that young agripreneurs from the ages of 25 to 35, coming from 24 countries, had on their lives and their businesses. So the survey highlighted the loss of markets as a major impact of the policy decisions under the pandemic, which is affecting young people's business, work, but also family and communities at large. The movement restrictions and lockdowns and also the uncertainty due to the crisis have led to reduced demand, especially for highly perishable goods, like, for example, vegetables and animal products. And even in the cases of continuing demand, all these disruptions in transportations and the associated increased cost are making it difficult for young producers to reach markets. Then consequent financial loss has been reported as a result of these lockdowns at national and also local levels. Most informal businesses that employ large numbers of youth have been forced to close. And in addition to this, young informal agricultural wage workers, which were including, which include, for example, seasonal migrant workers, are losing the opportunity to earn additional income during labor-intensive planting and harvesting period, which were basically the ones of the lockdown. Further, it has been observed that access to essential inputs have been severely restricted. The pandemic has been having effect on availability of agricultural inputs, such as like animal feeds and seeds, as these are largely imported in the countries, and the closure of national borders has affected this access and availability and also prices. And the movement of restrictions and resulting limitations in the transportation networks has also made it difficult to access the suppliers of the different agro inputs. And lastly, what we have assessed was that some of the young farmers that were included in this survey have reported of not being able to access their farms due to the movement restrictions, leading to some delays in the planting activities and also negotiations and contractual agreements with business partners, which usually is conducted in person. They have been conducted remotely, but it has been difficult to adjust to this, let's say, new normal. Next, please. So, although all the challenges and impediments that we have been featuring so far, we have assessed that many youth innovations and adaptations in terms of rapid change of business models caused to defy, the issues caused by the pandemic have surfaced. One example is the one featured here. So it's Adeline from Rwanda. She's a major youth mushroom producer. In Rwanda, there was a major closure in terms of hotels, restaurants, the whole, hotel and catering industry. And this was, the main chunk of her basically client. They were the main direct clients in terms of her production. So what she did was to quickly refocus her sales directly to individual customers. Next, we have another example coming from our assessment. So it comes from Arthur from Uganda. Arthur is the co-founder and project engineer of Kayenza Energy, a biogas business in Uganda, but like in many other countries, due to the disruption of the public transport in response to the pandemic, millions of the Ugandans were left without the access to basic services like cooking fuel. So Arthur and his company started to quickly collect orders via social media, accepting also mobile money payments. And while delivering their orders, they were also delivering flyers with the advice from the Ministry of Health in how to behave during the pandemic. So these are there are many other examples that we suggest you to go and have a look. There is a hyperlinked source within this slide. And then we can go to the last slide. On the major lessons learned, the recommendations further to all our surveys and assessments. We can start maybe from the use of remote learning and educational and vocational education and training resources that should be adopted to mitigate the loss of learning and to avoid also child labor increase during the closures of schools and training institutes. So strong efforts should be directed to expanding countries' measures to cover also the rural areas, but also to strengthen agribusiness related education and training, while also including psychological support, as some trauma due to the pandemic have been assessed. Third, every effort should be made to retain rural young women and men in the productive participation of the labor force, and while protecting fundamental rights such as freedom of association, expression, which are critical for young people to be allowed in order to express their views, ideas, while engaging them also in the measures post-pandemic that should also include them. Overall, gender, age, and minorities equalities must be strongly taken into account throughout all the measures initiated by both governments, but also development partners during the pandemic, but also in the recovery phase. Specific to young agripreneurs, we must ensure the economic and financial stimulus package, including measures which are adapted to youth-led businesses. In respect of inputs, which was one of the major, which was one of the major issues that we have assessed, governments can facilitate the supply and availability of inputs. And agripreneurs should be included in the design process of programs and as beneficiaries of also existing and potential government schemes. And lastly, in respect of social protection measures, governments can provide targeted temporary compensation schemes in the form of in-kind food vouchers, or also specific cash transfers that include, for example, the cost of rent and utilities. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and we finish the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sena.
Francine, I don't want to give you the chance again so that good morning, everybody. Very sorry for my technical problem this morning. I'm very happy to join you. As she earlier said, my name is Sena Luka. I'm calling from Togo. It's such a great honor for me to be part of this amazing webinar where you have policymakers, international organizations like FAO, and young people. Thank you very much, Madam, for the great presentation. Normally, we're supposed to have Mr. C, Mr. Alain C. Traoré, who is the Director of Agriculture and Rural Development at the ECOWAS Commission, but he's not available today to join us. So what we do is, I think, Francine, I'm right, is just to invite our two next panelists who will be joining Madame Francesca to respond to some few questions. So is it possible that we see our panelists, so that participants? Yes. So welcome, Madame Elizabeth Nsimadala. Madame Elizabeth, she's president of the Pan-African Farmers Organization and the Eastern African Farmers Federation. She's a member of the advisory committee of the UN Food Systems Summit and the Global Steering Committee for Forest Farm Facility. She's a farmer champion promoting technology and innovation, and she was just recently recognized by the World Farm Organization as a woman contributing to the SDGs. So thank you very much, Madame Elizabeth, for joining us. Are you around? Can you hear your voice? Madame Elizabeth.
Yes. Hello, Sena. How are you? Good morning, good afternoon to all the participants. I'm around.
Excellent. Thank you. Next panelist is Madame Bogolo Kenewendo. Madame Bogolo is Managing Director of Kenewendo Advisory in the former Ministry of Investment. So now we welcome a former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry in Botswana. Ms. Kenewendo is a member of the United Nations Secretary General High-Level Panel on Digital Cooperation and Group on Financing for Development and the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders. She is passionate about the empowerment and protection of children and women. Madame Bogolo, we are very honored to have you, as we say in Botswana, Pula. Welcome.
Pula, thank you very much. I'm glad we finally reached here. I've been texting frantically that we just lost power in my area, but I'm glad that I'll be able to join these discussions. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So, Madame Elizabeth and Bogolo and Madame Francesca, we are very happy to have a very gender-sensitive panel this morning with three amazing women, as you could see their bio. Few questions to you now. Each of you will be having 3 to 4 minutes to respond to the 2 questions. We listened to Madame Francesca, and she presented very well the critical issues that young people are facing in Africa as regard the COVID-19. And also we could see some of the work that young people are doing to address the COVID. And as you could see, the case from Rwanda, Uganda, etc., young people are refusing to be taken to hostage by the COVID-19. So questions now is, from your perspective, Madame Francesca, Madame Bogolo, what are the critical issues faced by young women and men in rural Africa? I will give you 3 minutes to each one of you to respond to that. So what's your view on that? We'll start with Madame Francesca.
Maybe we can start from the other panelists. I just talked, so we give the floor to others.
Okay, fine. So we give the chance to who wanna go first? Maybe Madame Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Sena, for this question on the critical issues faced by young women and men in rural Africa. I think listening from the keynote that was given by Gueli and the presentation that was made by Dala, it really, they really pointed out most of the big issues and what I would call the critical issues faced by young women and men in rural Africa. The issues affecting the young women and men in Africa are a lump sum, or I can say a bunch of problems ranging from the access to production and across the entire value chain, right from, if we can say, starting from the fork up to, starting from the farm up to the fork. There are a number of issues that happen across that entire value chain. And I think maybe if I can diverge a bit from the question, having a well presentation of these issues, I think, and understanding the challenge of Africa, listening from what has been presented, the issues of young men, the issues of youth, are more important today than actually yesterday. When you look at the population of Africa, 60% of the population being below 24 years and being the youngest population globally, it really represents a huge opportunity for the labor market. I think the issue now should not be looking at the problems. The problems have been there, but I think we need to move a step further to now see what do we need to put in place to make sure that we overcome these problems. Because the World Bank and IFAD estimated that 10 million youth will enter the labor market every year for the next decade. So which is an additional pressure to the already strained unemployment situation. So from my perspective, I think we don't have to keep lamenting of the problems that are already there, but we need to move a step further to the actions that need to be put in place, either by government or by the private sector or by the youth and the young women themselves on how they can overcome these challenges. And for me, I think we should begin with the integration of the young women specific priorities and policy needs with matching policy support. Looking at all the countries of Africa, majority of them, for example, have youth, ministries of youth, ministries of gender, they have gender policies, they have youth policies. But do these policies, are there investments that really translate with these policies? We need to see incentives put in place. We need to see subsidies given to the young women, given to the youth. And we also need to see tax holidays. Majority of our youth associations, youth cooperatives, youth businesses don't live to celebrate their second birthday. And reason because they're being overtaxed. So they can only survive for 1 year. So all we need is to see these youth being supported with the policy instruments that are in place. But also we need to see the financial support being put in place. Youth need patient working capital. We need to see the youth and young women being supported technically. We have many innovating ideas out there. But these ideas, how do we translate them into working models? We need to see incubation centers being put in place to develop the skills of these youth. The physical infrastructure, when it comes to things to do with value addition, with agro-processing, with the development of these cottage industries, I think our governments need to do much to support youth in these areas. But also, we've seen most times women have been left as orphans. They can't access financing because of lack of collateral. They lack skills. They have limited education. Their work experience is at times limited. They can't access machinery because they can't afford it. So there is need for a holistic approach in terms of addressing all these issues that we see affecting the young women and the young youth, especially in the agriculture sector, if we are to create rural, if we are to create rural transformation. And secondly, I think the youth cannot leave it alone to the government or to the private sector. There is what we can do on our own. There's what young women can do on their own. Quite often we've complained that our voice is not heard, like we heard from the presentation by Dara, that youth or young women's voice has been lacking quite often at the serving tables. But this is because majority of them have been working in the backyard as individuals, as private companies, or in a mix of other groups where their needs have not been prioritized. We need to see stronger business groups. We need to see associations. We need to see cooperatives. We need to see champion agribusiness networks like what FAO is doing in the different countries of Africa. So with all this in place, they will be able to strengthen the young women to be able to speak volumes in terms of aggregating their needs, in terms of aggregating their demand, in terms of aggregating the investment priorities for the inputs, if they're in production, let's say the fertilizer, the seed, for the services, in terms of support financially, the insurance, but also with the output when it comes to market. But also in terms of attracting the attention of all the key actors across the agriculture value chain. And lastly on this, learning from the impact of COVID-19 and what has been presented. I think young women need to be more innovative than before. We need to take advantage of the increased mobile phone penetration in most African countries. Statistics indicate that African countries have a mobile phone penetration of more than 80%. So we need to take advantage of this and begin doing business in an unusual way. We need to be as more innovative as possible. We have to begin generating data to be able to use this data to advocate and lobby for policies and investments in the agriculture sector. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. I think you responded very well to my first question about what are the actions that need to be taken to ensure that the response address some of the key issues young people are facing in Africa. Before we lose Madam Minister, thank you very much again for being with us as a minister or former minister. Tell me, what should government do to ensure youth inclusive COVID-19 responses? What do you think should be the best strategy for government in Africa particularly? Madam Bogolo, up to you.
Thank you very much. I will not turn on my video this time, just to secure the little bit of bandwidth I have left on my dongle. So I think, what Elizabeth talked about really quite covered the issues that we know young people and women are facing and the recommendations that are necessary to be implemented in order for us to move forward. What is very clear, or what COVID has made clear for Africa in particular, is that our social fabric, social economic fabric is quite unstable. And what that means is that of the millions of people that we've been saying have been pulled out of poverty, just one 3-month economic shakeup can lead to us having all those people. I think now it's being estimated to be 27 million people sliding back into poverty. And the majority of these are young people and women. And so as we think about bouncing back and building a post-COVID economy and world, the priority should be on increasing the resiliency of our communities. And we cannot talk about resiliency of our communities if our policies are not gender focused and they are not youth focused, because we know now more than ever that these are the people that are most vulnerable to any shocks in the economy. And so I will not touch on some of the examples that were given by Elizabeth, and I'll focus on some of the more systemic, higher level systemic issues that need to be taken care of. For example, the provision of markets. So once we've dealt with all the issues that Elizabeth talked about, access to finance, access to land, having infrastructure and all of that, then what happens after someone produces? So further down the value chain, what happens? Are we enabling citizens, particularly in those groups, to tap into or to have an access to market? And this refers to both domestic and international. And one of the recommendations here is as we negotiate trade agreements, that we ensure that there are some clauses that speak particularly to how we're going to enable women, particularly for cross-border trade, and how we're going to ensure that all the cumbersome rules that currently exist for cross-border trade will be lessened in order to facilitate particularly the small, micro and informal traders that we know young women and young people fall into. And in addition to that, there is also, as we look at financing much broader, where are we going to take financing for development? Where are we going to take that money? Be very deliberate. I'll give you an example. In Botswana, we have 8 districts, and there are studies that show exactly where poverty is, the demographics of the people in those areas, and we need very specifically targeted interventions. So if we say subsidies, we should know that in the southern part of Botswana, that's where people with small stock are, and their subsidies should be specific to the product there in order to enable those products in the areas, because we have learned that one size fits all does not work, and we need to encourage more of the supply development programs going back to the markets more domestically now. The retailers, we know that there are big brothers in every region, and those big brother countries have very strong competitive markets, and those tend to really overshadow the markets in smaller countries like Botswana. So this is a case of South Africa versus Botswana, or you see Kenya versus Burundi, or any other country. And so governments need to be more deliberate on that supply development program, having retail charters that encourage foreign establishments to support local-based businesses in order to ensure that there is a more equitable access to the markets, and that products are not just being imported. Because like we said, Africa has been said quite often that it is that last frontier of poverty, and agriculture is certainly one of the areas of ensuring that we reduce the number of people in poverty. And going back to the more higher areas of systemic failures or challenges around trade agreements. I mean, if you look at African countries are very rich in agricultural products, cocoa, making chocolate. But if African countries export cocoa, it is at a very low or zero tariff rate. And when they export something that is that has value add, then we have challenges of about 40% or so. And these are figures that need to be challenged because they keep African producers in the lower spectrum of value addition. And that is really where, and we tend to lose a space of where we could make a lot more money. So those are just some of my high level thoughts, in addition to what Elizabeth said, because I didn't want to repeat what was already said a little earlier on. But I will leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam, for joining us. And I hope you have enough power to be with us at the end. So now maybe back to Francisca, or maybe Mr. Gay as sub-regional FAO coordinator. The question can be what FAO is doing to support government in doing this action, like by ensuring that youth inclusive COVID-19 responses are being taken by government. Maybe Mr. Gay, you there, Mr. Robert, you would like to comment on what FAO is doing to support government? And after Madam Francisca. Or Madam Francisca, you can just go ahead while Mr. Robert prepared himself.
So, well, I can mention what we already included actually in our policy brief. So it's a commitment from the FAO side at global and regional level. The FAO is going to collaborate with different global networks, other development partners, but also rural youth organizations and regional institutions to advocate for and ensure the inclusion of the specific needs of rural young women and men in policy strategies and the overall discourse during and after the pandemic in respect of the different challenges that we have assessed. Going down at country level, FAO is already and is going to support further its member countries in the effort to include rural youth concerns into all these policy strategies and also in the recovery programs, while stressing the key inclusion, their key inclusion in food systems and in productive investments during and also in the aftermath of the pandemic.
Thank you. Do we have Mr. Robert at all? Thank you, Madam Francisca. Do we have Mr. Robert at all? No? Okay. So maybe what we can do is to allow Madam Elizabeth and Madam Bogolo, if they are still around, to share what they think should be done when government or FAO or other institution trying to address COVID-19 from a gender perspective. 1 minute each, what do you think should be the best strategy, the best approach to integrate gender aspects in their response?
Yeah, thank you very much. And to my colleagues, thank you for the additional inputs to the discussions. I think first and foremost, when it comes to government, there's need to ensure that youth have equal access to information. There's a lot of information out there, but of course, majority of the youth don't really have access to this kind of information. For example, we did a study to assess, to understand the available financing in our different financial institutions. But we realized that there was a lot of money that was lying idle there, when on the other side, the majority of the youth are complaining that, there's lack of financing as one of the biggest challenges. So information needs to be out and it needs to reach the targeted audience, who in this case are the young women and the youth. So in regard to COVID, there's a lot of, for example, support that is given to the population. So youth and young women also need to be considered. For example, when giving out these protective gears, the youth need to be taken care of. But also they need to be given an opportunity where they can report and also give feedback on the impact of COVID to their enterprises. I'm happy that FAO and other organizations are doing, for example, the surveys. They are going out in the field to understand the impact of COVID to the youth enterprises. But also, not stopping from that, youth should have access to the recovery efforts. A lot of efforts have been put in place. So many programs have been put in place by the government, by the development partners. There are many measures that have been put in place, but majority of the youth don't have access to some of these recovery efforts. So it should be important that youth have targeted recovery efforts put together by governments or development partners where they can, benefit from. Then there should also be a long-term economic inclusion. In this case, it's not about COVID, because COVID just came in yesterday. It might stay, or tomorrow we might not have COVID, but other issues are going to come on board. We will have other challenges. The other day we had fall armyworm, we had the desert locusts, we have, right now we have floods in most of the Eastern African countries. So we need long-term economic inclusion for the youth and the young women. Their needs and priorities must be identified, and long-term programs like I mentioned, for skills development, but also investments to strengthen their capacities have to be put in place and in a sustainable way. This kind of support should not be a one-off, where government today meets a youth group, maybe gives them, handouts, and the next day they cannot sustain themselves. So we need to run away from corruption. We need to run away from the support driven by political ego. We need to support the youth and women groups sustainably. And then the COVID-19 disruption to the different sectors, which we see now. Listening from the presentations you've had, all the sectors have been disrupted. This COVID disruption, from our point of view, should be a game changer. It should be an opportunity to building better, sustainable systems. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much. We have a question from the chat. I think it's better we ask the question, but if some young people would like to intervene, they can at all time write that question in the chat box or raise their hands. We can give the floor to some of them. But the question to Madame Kerewento, there's an amazing issue here raised by one participant. How can we maximize the opportunities and minimize the threat for rural women and girls within the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the FCTA? How can we maximize the opportunity for young people and minimize the threat? Madame Bogolo, up to you. Over to you.
Thank you. Can I see that question? Because you were breaking.
Okay,
let me have a quick response to the earlier question while I look for the other question and read it. So for me, in addition to what has already been said, I think mentorship is very important. Creating those incubators that provide support on capacity and provide support on standards, particularly during this low period, so that when business picks up again, then our women and young people are ready to trade and to be competitive. So that for me is important. And some of these issues really don't have to be new innovative ideas. Some of them are traditional, and they just need to be modernized. For example, here in our culture, back in the day, when someone had more than enough and they had a neighbor who didn't have anything, they would give them one or two cows to take care of, 2 cows to take care of. And when they would have a calf, then the calf would be for them, and they would continue growing their herd and would get support from the more wealthier neighbor. So that in a traditional sense was mentorship, but also was, if you think about it, some sort of VC support in a traditional sense. And we need to deal with that and modernize some of these traditional ideas and make them work now in a more systemic way in the rural areas in particular. So I think that there's something to learn there. And if FAO is thinking about how they can support communities, they should really ask about the indigenous knowledge that exists in those communities, but in particular respect to agriculture, and then support to modernize that indigenous knowledge and indigenous practice so that we can have higher yields. There are several reasons why I'm pushing for indigenous knowledge, but this is not really the right platform for me to go further into it. And when it comes to
absolutely.
When it comes
yes, go
to
ahead.
when it comes to lifting obstacles for cross-border trade, that they doesn't just provides more opportunity and access for big companies. Okay, all right. So I get that question. There's what we call a simplified trade regime, and those simplified trade regimes, they reduce for small scale cross-border traders in particular, they will reduce some of the needs, like they will waive certificate of origin, they will relax requirements for export, import permits, sanitary and phytosanitary certification. And that is particularly for goods that do not have any safety issues, for goods that do not have, so it's security and safety issues. Some of these things can be waived just for small scale cross-border traders, and a value can be attached to that. How can we maximize the opportunities and minimize the threats for rural women and girls of the AFCFTA? All right, so for this one, really the AFCFTA does not have any specification for including more women or more young people. And that is because it is a policy issue that needs to be dealt with at national level. And one of the things that just needs to be done more holistically is ensuring that the doing business environment works, that people can start businesses easily, and it is not very expensive to do so, that there's a lot of doing business reforms that are ongoing that support those that have been formerly disenfranchised, because we want them to be part of the mainstream economy. Okay, there's another question and I'm trying to read it. Stable economic returns demonstrates that agriculture pays. Okay, back over to you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much. It's such a great honor to have you and have your view on the aspect of the FCTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area. So for participants, some are asking me inbox what's FCTA. So you just Google it, you'll see what the African Continental Free Trade Area is. It's easy to be found on African Union website, an amazing opportunity. And I think that was a very great question. So we would like to thank all our panelists at this time and move on to the next session where we can have young people discuss directly with parliamentarians. So Madam Elizabeth, Madam Bogolo, Madam Francesca, thank you very much. Just be close by. We may have to call you on board anytime we have a specific question. And right. I hope
thank you very much.
Power will be back to Butcher. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Siabonga. Okay. Now we move on to the next session. We'll be giving chance for young people to discuss directly, to dialogue with parliamentarians and see what the action of our parliamentarian with regard to COVID-19 from a gender equality and resilient food system perspective. So we'll be having a congressman now, Honorable Christopher de Venicia. Honorable Christopher is the representative of the 4th District of Pangasinan in the Philippine House of Representatives. Congressman Venecia is also the chairman of the Special Committee on Creative Industry and Performing Arts. He advocates for multi-sectoral collaboration and the expansion of livelihood in the rural area through tourism and agricultural modernization, as well as galvanizing culture for both economic growth and nation building. Mr. Honorable Christopher, welcome very much. I don't know how they say that in Philippines, but I know they say Selama Pagi. It's a good morning there. And then we'll be having another honorable, Madam Melissa Alamo, currently the program manager for the Policy Advocacy Unit and coordinator for the Young Farmer Program in Pakistan. I hope you read some Indonesian. Pagbasang kilusang gamba samahang sasaka. It's a National Confederation of Family Farm Organization in the Philippines, serving the farmers, fishing for indigenous people, rural women, and rural youth, with over 75 member organizations present in 44 provinces. So thank you very much, Melissa, for joining us as a leader of young people. I think we now be coming back to our continent. This is my second honorable, not Melissa. Melissa is a rep of young people, youth voice in this session. And Honorable Jacqueline Amogin, she's a member of parliament for Uganda, representing Ngora District and Vice Chair of the African Parliamentary Network Against Hunger and Malnutrition in the Pan-African Parliament. She founded the Jacqueline Amogin Development Foundation that aim at initiating community transformation and empowerment through education and knowledge. Honorable Jacqueline, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to discuss with you. And then we have our second young people, Mr. Kamotima Tumwebaze, Mr. Kamutima is the chair of the Young Farmers Champion Network in Uganda, again, which aim at promoting the development of small and medium agribusiness youth-led SMEs in agricultural production and providing sustainable jobs for the youth. He's a recipient of the Global Fellowship, the Global Social Benefit Institute, Online Accelerator, but also the Open Ed Fellowship. And finally, the Global African Agribusiness Accelerator Platform, and 2018 One Young World Ambassador. So we have here a Nobel Peace Prize in the making. So Mr. Kamutima, thank you very much for joining us. And then we have our colleague from Senegal, Mr. Karim Diop. He is the president of the National Youth Council of Senegal and the vice president of the Afro-Arab Youth Council since 2018. Mr. Diop was also appointed the West Africa focal point for the reform of the text of the Pan-African Youth Union, and he is a member of the Youth Forum Conference of the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation since October 2008. He is a specialist in audit and monitoring evaluation of projects and FIFA sport manager. Mr. Kadim Diop, he likes football. Thank you very much, Jeff, for joining us this morning. So question to you, and we'll be having this great dialogue now that will help us to see what are some of the actions that can be taken for young people. Maybe we start with the Honorable Christopher de Venetia. Honorable, thank you for joining us. Question to you is, as a parliamentarian, the way you will be doing there in Venetia, that's very much appreciated. Thank you very much, Francine, for this. But based on your experience with supporting development of policies, how to work to make them successful and gender sensitive, those policies? Honorable Christopher, up to you first.
All right, so thank you for having me. I actually prepared a message which is centered mostly on this bill that I'm championing in the House of Representatives, which is basically the Young Farmers and Fisher Folk Challenge Program. This was formerly known as the Magna Carta for Young Farmers, again, with a goal of food security in mind, but really more of empowering and emboldening our young farmers to continue on in farming. So very, very quickly, let me just thank Jean-Leonard Touadi, the Special Coordinator for Parliamentary Alliances team, Responsible Investments, for giving me this opportunity to speak on this important issue. So I come from a province known as Pangasinan, and we're north of the capital, and we are primarily an agricultural one. It's one of the country's top rice granaries, for the information of everybody here, and it's also a major producer of coconut, mango, and eggplant. So coming from this background, I'm deeply concerned about the topic of food security and welfare of our farmers, particularly the young farmers. And it's my job as representative of this district to ensure food security and to champion the welfare and interests of the, if not the most hardworking sectors in our country. So with Pangasinan and the Philippines in general being predominantly agricultural, it is therefore ironic and deeply concerning that the youth is losing interest in agriculture more and more each year, especially amidst digitization and our pivot towards the fourth industrial revolution. So based on a study that was conducted by the Central Mindanao University, which is a state university, the average age of the Filipino farmer today is 55 years old. This varies depending on the study. In some studies, it's 57 years old, and in other studies, it's 59. In 2019, employment in the agricultural industry or sector totaled 9.72 million Filipinos, and we are about 108 million, which is a drop from a 2014 figure of 11.84 million. And this is due to a range of reasons. You have culture, productivity, lack of a strategic roadmap, meager resources, etc. And to make matters worse, the average daily wage rate for agricultural workers in 2019 was at around 331 pesos, or that's about $16 per day. But this figure doesn't take into account, I'm sorry, not $16, but $6 per day. But this figure doesn't take into account that the work is seasonal. So on most days, most of our traditional farmers are left without any means of income. Moreover, the UN envoy on youth has recently reported that access to information, lack of credit, and negative perceptions around farming are the leading reasons why young people are leaving small farming at such alarming rates. So the dilemma of our rural youth is quite alarming. And because the work of their parents and grandparents have been grueling and they continue to live under the poverty line, they are urged by their parents to study hard and get a job so they wouldn't have to suffer, quote unquote, the same fate as them. The income that family farmers earn today, if they remain in traditional non-agribusiness type of modalities, is truly no match to the salaries afforded by employees in other professions. However, when able bodied young men and women leave the farmlands, the soil deteriorates at a faster rate, causing lower levels of production and higher levels of hunger in the long run. In either case, the prospects of our food security remains grim as ever. So for us to achieve food security and to embark on genuine rural transformation, we have to invest in our youth. And this is why we are championing the Young Farmers and Fisher Folk Challenge bill in the lower house of representatives. So this may sound cheesy, but I'll say it anyway. There is forever in farming and fisheries. So, for our non Filipino speaking audience, the term forever in Filipino parlance has simply become millennial speak for happily ever after in love stories and fairy tales. As Filipinos, we love our ails, we love our heartbreaks. As we're quite the emotional race, we love to cry in movies, and we celebrate love themes and sometimes fashion our own lives after them. But when even the strongest of love teams break up, it shatters our impressions, ergo the term walang forever or no forever. But by changing the narrative, by co opting it and saying there is forever, this simply means that one may find true happiness, success, and lasting fulfillment in agriculture. With the passage of this proposed measure, hopefully the government can help bring this concept of forever in agriculture to life. So, what does forever stand for? F is for food security. According to the World Food Summit, food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. But such is hardly the case in the Philippines. In 2019, 2.3 million Filipinos were still experiencing involuntary hunger or hunger due to mere lack of food. This year, as COVID 19 raises through the overall productivity and value chain of various sectors of our economy, not just agriculture, we anticipate both the poverty rate and hunger incidence to go higher. A higher incidence of hunger in a resource filled country such as ours is simply unacceptable. So, forever should really start with F, food security, in mind. O and forever is oversight and organization. So, as we all know, any successful government policy must be characterized by reliability, predictability, and consistency. And the establishment of an oversight body that will set the policy and rationalize the Young Farmers and Fisher Folk Challenge program is key. So, having a law sanctioned body will institutionalize the goals of this program in the long run. So actually, Section 5 of this measure creates a Young Farmers and Fisher Folk Challenge Council. Obviously, it will be led by our Minister of Agriculture, and many other sectors will have representation in this council, such as those in trade, in research and development, innovation, human capital regeneration. So this is really more of capacity building of our youth, land distribution, among many others. But I think what's very important is that this council will essentially have representation from the private sector. So you will have women in the council, you will have youth in the council, you will have members of the business community, those who are actively engaged in farm tourism, and those who are engaged in farm to table dining. So all of these voices in addition to the public sector, will create a more responsive and tailored policies towards the sector. I mean, who better to elaborate on the needs of the youth than the stakeholders themselves? And as the country builds back better, fresh new ideas are needed to be able to infuse and reinvigorate this ailing sector of our economy. Of course, this council will be working closely with research development agencies. Yeah. So of course, this council will be working closely with the academe, with the research development agencies, and hopefully together we can put the cool back in agriculture. So definitely one of our agencies, the Agricultural Training Institute, is already sort of consolidating efforts for the youth sector. But what we want to do with this measure in the lower house is to really institutionalize the effort so that regardless of who is seated there will be continuity and innovation in the said program. R in forever is really roads to resources. So this has been elaborated on quite extensively by the previous panelists, but there really is a need for access to credit, technology, training, and of course, land. The council will be in charge of identifying relevant capacity building and livelihood programs, which currently are sort of spread out across the different various government agencies. Sometimes there's also a duplication of programs. So all of these have to be rationalized given the limited resources so that there is a more strategic use and direction for the sector. This council essentially will be tasked to come up with, job fairs, employment in farm tourism and agro-industrial zones, and other employment bridging initiatives. And I think it's also important to give the youth real life exposure and experiences to the world of agriculture. And because these are ways of attracting them to the sector. And we're not just talking about providing them an opportunity to see traditional farming modalities, because it's essentially these traditional farming modalities that sort of turn them off from continuing in the first place. So what we have to showcase are the new modern agribusiness models that can actually stimulate and excite the imaginations of our youth. So we're talking about agritourism, which is agricultural tourism. We're talking about organic farming models. We're talking about agroponics, aquaponics, farm to table dining, and many other activities which essentially expand and revitalize the value chain of agriculture. Let me skip to letter E in forever, which is education. I think this is very, very important. Let me just cite a brief statistic that enrollment in our state universities and colleges for courses in agriculture has significantly declined across several decades. So in 1980, enrollment in our top state university and college, which is UP Los Baños for agriculture, used to be at 51%. It's now at 4.7%. So that's a drop of almost 47%. And not to mention, now that the country has pivoted towards a K to 12 system for our basic and higher education, enrollment in technical vocational courses in agriculture is now less than 1% nationwide. The same experience can be said of our arts and culture and design tracks, as well as our sports tracks. So there's still really this proclivity among our youth for courses in STEM, and they do want to get into certified professions. So basically what we are imagining that the council will do is really to revitalize the educational system in our country and to provide those strategic interventions as early as grade 3 or 4. Right now, there's a school gardening program, but we feel that it's not enough. There has to be immersions and field trips in in training institutes and demo farms within their own respective municipalities. And then there has to be some kind of continuation into key performance indicator of increased enrollment in the agricultural track in senior high school. So that's grade 11 and 12. Of course, it's another ballgame altogether to get them to enroll in courses in college that may have something to do with agriculture, but it's sort of a seed that you have to plant early on in the K to 12 educational system. V in forever stands for value adding and technology. So obviously there's so many technologies available right now. I think it's really a matter of awareness and also a matter of access. So I think right now there's so many exciting mobile applications and software technologies that are being set up to help develop the rice industry in the country. So Phil Rice, together with the Development Bank of the Philippines, and the Nueva Ecija Seed Growers Multipurpose Cooperative partnered with a fintech agency called Paymaya to create Binhi Ipadala, which is basically a digital voucher system that aims to ease seed delivery and distribution of rice farmers. There's also this mobile app now available on Play Store called the Phil Rice LCC app, which is designed to aid farmers, extension workers, and students to assess the nitrogen status of rice plants to further determine the right amount of nitrogen fertilizer needed. And just to add, and I myself am a user of this platform, there's this exciting concept called Cropital, which is basically a website which draws on the concept of crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. So we do know that farmers are always hard pressed for credit, and sometimes they don't have enough collateral to secure them those loans from government financial institutions. They don't have land. They have lack of machineries. So what this Cropital website decided to do is create a crowdsourcing model wherein millennials and those who are sort of interested in agriculture but don't really know how to move forward with it are able to invest in farms which are located all across the archipelago. So you can invest. There are minimum investments, and it's actually not very restrictive. If you have a few thousands of pesos to spare, you can actually invest and get your returns later on during harvest. So I think this is a really good form of disruption as enabled by the digital economy and the fourth industrial revolution. And we're also thinking of how to maybe institutionalize this model so that it can be implemented in a bigger, in a broader scale that will allow even more people to invest in farms through digital modalities. E and forever is employment and entrepreneurship. So again, that is going to be a mandate of the said council. I heard venture capitalism earlier from one of the speakers. So this is also something that the council should be tasked to do, which is really match agricultural enterprises with those people with capital to spare, or the VCs or the sharks, in a sense, to be able to create closer forms of collaboration. And finally, R in forever is regulation of standards. So obviously, there is really a need to be able to create more targeted policies for the young farmers and fisher folk of the Philippines. There needs to be proper monitoring of what's happening all throughout the globe and also what's happening here. And the media sort of has a proclivity and propensity towards controversial issues. So sometimes a best practice in farming doesn't make it to the headlines, and people don't necessarily hear about all these sterling business practices and models that are happening in far reaches of the archipelago. So basically, the council should be able to find a way to work alongside broadcast media to be able to properly communicate what is happening, all the cool things that are happening in the agricultural sector. Of course, government can't do it alone. You need a reinvigorated and you need an engaged private sector to be able to achieve the vision of food security and a future in which young people are interested, engaging, and also thriving in the sector. So yeah, basically that about sums up the bill. There are so many other measures that we are championing in the lower house right now. Uh, One is urban agriculture, because agriculture has been largely centralized in our rural and in peri-urban and in rural areas. And there's an opportunity, especially with this pandemic, and that we went on a almost 5 6 month lockdown, that people were just staying at home. And so one of the ways in which, people were able to cater and take care of their mental health is actually engaging in some kind of a horticulture and, just planting a lot of boutique varieties of plants, and wanting to understand more where their food is coming from. And so you have a lot of people in urban centers starting to plant, herbs in their balconies. So I think there are so many opportunities also enabled by this pandemic that should be exploited and capitalized. And if there's any bright note in this rather dreary situation caused by COVID-19, it's that of all the sectors in the Philippine economy, the only one that registered an increase in productivity was agriculture. Believe it or not, industries, especially those that sort of are on the brink.
Excuse me, Honorable.
Yeah.
Yes, Honorable.
Would you mind wrapping up in like 1 minute, because we'll be having an amazing intercontinental dialogue, and we expect to have some of this insight during that dialogue. So would you mind wrapping up in a minute?
Yeah, I was actually wrapping up already. But anyway, I just wanted to say that imagine of all the sectors, agriculture registered productivity and an increase. Uh, so I think that's quite amazing. And there's an opportunity here to really build back better by really putting the focus on a largely ignored sector in our economy for the longest time. So that being said, thank you everyone, and looking forward to hearing and learning from our other analysts as well. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po. That's it. Thank you very much in Manila. And as Francine has just shared the news, we know there was a typhoon that struck the Philippines these days, and all our hearts, all our prayers are with you. And we hope to have you, and also our colleague Melissa, who will not unfortunately join us today. Thank you very much. Now, I think it's high time we give the chance to an amazing young lady. Or maybe since Melissa is not here, we move on to Honorable. We come back to Africa, and we ask Honorable Jacqueline as well. She's Vice Chair of the Africa Parliamentarian Network Against Hunger and Malnutrition. So she's well placed to she's well placed to share her insight and also respond to the same questions. So Honorable Jacqueline, welcome to the discussion. The same question that we asked earlier go to you as well. Question is, what are some of the youth and gender sensitive agricultural policies that you have been taking there in Uganda that works, that you'd like to share with us this morning? And feel free to respond and give your own perspective as well. Madam, over to you, Honorable.
Yeah, we have just a challenge with the network sometimes. But thank you so much. And I would like to appreciate the colleagues who have talked and given insights in regards to a participation and engagement of young people. And from greetings from Uganda. And I would like to give you Uganda's perspective in terms of as per the FA.
Well, I think, can you maybe stop the...
So I'm just trying to share the perspectives, the work that Uganda has done in regards to engagement of young people, and especially women. when it comes to talking about agriculture in Uganda. I don't know whether I'm being heard.
Yes, Madam. Honorable, we can hear you.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to recognize the role that FAO, that is FAO, has played in ensuring that they build the capacity of not only parliamentarians, but also other stakeholders in ensuring that food security and nutrition is key in the day-to-day legislation and advocacy in country. And I would like to focus my presentation in support to that in 3 areas, that is in policy support, that FAO has helped in working with the parliamentarians, and then also evidence generation to inform legislation, and then capacity building. And all these 3 have been developed so as to include youth aspects in the agricultural related activities. And I would like to emphasize the fact that when we're talking about young people, it becomes a different issue, especially when we talk about agriculture, because agriculture is still seen as a dirty game when it comes to the youth. But having looked at those 3 areas, together with FAO, we've been able to review the national fisheries and agricultural policy to include the young people. And we have also worked with the government in ensuring that the national agriculture extension policy is in place, and then the national strategy for youth employment in agriculture. So, yeah, so I was giving you the 3 areas that we've worked together, but the other aspect is in regards to research, evidence generation, whereby we worked with the FAO, whereby a legal assessment study on labor law in the agriculture and forestry in Uganda. There's also a study on the situation of young people aged 14 to 17 years and dropouts in rural Uganda in the agricultural sector, and a study on the legal barriers and enablers for the age cohort to access decent work in the agricultural sector. There's also a situation analysis of youth employment in the fisheries and agricultural subsector in Uganda. And of course, undertaking assessment on the existing financial products and targeting the young people. Then we have the capacity building. But before I talk about the capacity building, support agriculture, we're talking about support agricultural statistics. And this we've worked with the FAO to have Uganda Bureau of Standards in engendering of the National Agriculture Survey tools. Statistics developed administrative data tools. Worked with the Uganda Bureau of Standards to develop agricultural census 2018-2019. But on capacity building, occupation safety and health training for youth on the main hazards in agriculture, developed risk. So those are some of the areas that FAO has worked closely with government of Uganda in ensuring that the young people are engaged in terms of agriculture and promoting food security in the country. Government has also collaborated with FAO to identify and award young people who are excelling in agricultural innovations and food value chains. And this year, 2020, FAO and Government of Uganda will scale the champions to national level. And Uganda has selected at least 2 champions per district. And that is in an endeavor to make sure that agriculture remains welcoming to the young people and engaging because as it is now, young people do not see agriculture as being, because the role models are still not talking about it. So Uganda is taking that approach. And I think basically that's what I can say in regards to the experiences from Uganda, working with FAO in ensuring agricultural productivity and food security is put at the forefront. Yeah. Hello?
Yes, thank you very much. I think that was, yes, we can hear you. Thank you very much for sharing that great perspective, Honorable. And I think it's good we allow our two next speakers also some time, our young people. We can start with our dear Kamutima Tumwebaze, like I said, who is a recipient of various awards and recognitions. Mr. Kamutima, we just listened to your Congress or parliamentarian, Madam Honorable Jacqueline. Tell me, what do you think should be really done to integrate or ensure that young people participate in policy formulation, policy monitoring, evaluation? Kamutima, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oruka. That's a good question, and I'm excited by the presentation from my honorable. It really is promising and is showing how how young people are being engaged in agriculture in our country. So what I can say is that for me, I've always believed that there is nothing about young people without them. So one of the things I believe in is the power of organization as young people. For example, we have been able to organize a network of young farmers champions here in Uganda to favorable policies where young people's views are captured. But I would like to talk about how young people have been engaged in policy from my experience in my country, Uganda. There have been a lot of interventions, including the Youth Livelihood Program, targeting, supporting young farmers. I mean, targeting, supporting youth in general in the country, but I would like to be specific and talk about the national strategy for youth employment in agriculture. This is, as far as I know, the only specific program, I mean strategy by government that is focusing on engaging young people in agribusiness. So with this strategy, the strategy is focusing majorly on creating an enabling environment for young farmers to ably engage and benefit in agribusiness. But also, the strategy is focusing on extension services, and you can see from what our honorable said that young people are fully engaged in the development of the national extension policy. But another thing I want to mention is that when this strategy was developed in 2017 by the Ministry of Agriculture with support from Food and Agriculture Organization, it realized that actually most young people are not interested in agriculture as a primary career path. This is because they have always associated agriculture with hard work and little financial reward. So as subsistence farming, looking at how their parents have been doing it and not benefiting. So the strategy realized there is a need to change mindsets by putting young people at the front, by proving to the young people that agriculture pays. So this is how the Youth Inspiring Youth in Agriculture initiative was birthed. And since in 2017, Ministry of Agriculture with FAO in partnership with other organizations in Uganda focusing on youth, they looked for champions all over the country. And these champions were trained both nationally and internationally. Some of the champions were taken to Songhai for capacity building.
May I please ask our colleagues to turn off their mic when they are not able to speak?
Okay.
Yes, go ahead, Kamutima.
Yeah, so I was saying that this strategy is focusing on providing real capacity building services, engaging youth in policy-related issues. And I was telling you that most young people have been built capacity. Some of the young people were taken to Songhai to build more capacity on how they can ably engage into agribusiness. Other young people have been linked directly to financial support. This is because with this capacity building, most young people have been able to develop fundable business plans. So most of them have been prepared and are investment ready. So now what I can say is that most programs here in Uganda are looking at how best young people can engage. And there is also government will. When you realize that you find that the government is highly interested in supporting initiatives that are promoting youth engagement in agribusiness. Yeah, for now, I can say that, but I can also say that the champions have been able to work as role models in their rural communities to inspire other young people into agribusiness. This is because these youth champions are the ones acting as role models, showing other young people that agriculture works, because they have grown up with them, seen them start, and now they are champions within the rural communities. So this has been able to attract more young people to engage. So we thank the Ministry of Agriculture and the FAO for having come up with an idea of developing a strategy and also moving towards implementing it by implementing some of the activities. And also we are looking at how best other programs in the country can implement this strategy. And this is how I think FAO initiated a program focusing on documenting all these initiatives in the country, and then understanding what the initiatives are doing and creating a platform where these initiatives can come and plan together and be able to implement youth programs without doing the same thing in different ways. So this is a way of having a holistic approach. And I thank FAO for championing this towards making sure that young people are able to benefit from existing programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Webalenyo Kamutima, Webalenyo Honorable Jacqueline as well. Now we'll switch to a little bit of French. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Thank you everybody for participating in this great session today. We are trying to understand what the actions of parliamentarians are and what response they can give to our resilient systems and to ensure there's gender equality. We are now going to Senegal, Hadim Job, Derejef, Nangadev, as we say in our language, as chairperson of the National Youth Council. Tell us, what activities can you carry out to ensure that youth participate in the decision-making process and in the monitoring and evaluation of such policies and programs? Thank you, dear partners. Thank you, participants. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this activity, to present the experience of Senegal within the framework of the promotion of agricultural entrepreneurship amongst youth and women. To talk about that, we take a reference date 2012. Since 2012, with the arrival of the President Macky Sall, the state has put in place many programs and projects that encourages youth and women to engage in agriculture. We need to know that there are programs that are within the Ministry of Youth, but also there are projects that are lodged within the Ministry of Agriculture. I will start with the programs that are in the Ministry of Youth. Now there's a major program called Programme de Domaine Agricole, which is within the Ministry of Youth. and which encourages youth to engage in agriculture. It is a program whose objective is to implement 1,000 to 5,000 acres of land to develop them and to avail this to the youth. And first and foremost, we have land and water points, but also the state puts in place a program for training for the youth farmers. The state also organizes these youths in entrepreneurs, these agriculture interest groups. And this program is present in several regions, region of Southeast, the region of Seju, within Kodugu, and the north, such as the region of Luga, and also the central region, like the region of Jurbel. It is a major program which helps fight against youth unemployment, and for each of its components, there are about 500 young men and women who work directly in these programs. And with regards to direct employment, it is 3,000 youth and young men and women who are engaged. And within the framework of this program, there are other programs at the Ministry of Youth. We can talk about Agence Nationale pour la Promotion de l'Emploi des Jeunes. And this funds youth and assist them to put in place agricultural projects. State has already put in place for this program 3 billion CFA, and this is in collaboration with the National Youth Council, which is in the communes and also regions, to support youth so that they can be encouraged to engage in agriculture. Now there are the programs that the state has placed within the Ministry of Agriculture to urge youth, young entrepreneurs, and to assist them. We can talk about the PDR, is the support program to agriculture and rural entrepreneurship. It is implemented by the state of Senegal in partnership with IFAD and assists small producers like youth and especially women to improve food security and create employment. There's also another program within the Ministry of Agriculture that is called CANIDA, National Agency for Integration in the Area of Agriculture. Is responsible for the creation and the development of modern agricultural farms for youth and for women. And this agency has put in place about 50 agricultural firms within the whole of Senegal. And these firms assist youth to remain in the regions and also assist women to create wealth. The other program of the Minister of Agriculture is the Agri-Zone program. Is a project of 50 billion, and it supports more than 1,000, over 150,000 youth. This is extremely important because, you know, to fighting against illegal migration and fighting against rural exodus, the Senegal has put this in place to support the youth and to ensure that they engage in agricultural entrepreneurship. Apart from this program, there's another program that is called DER, Delegation to Rapid Entrepreneurship. Is a program that supports the youth and the women in the implementation of their agricultural project. And this program, as youth, we are represented within that program to encourage youth to go back to the land. And for this program, we had 50 billion, and National Council and the institutions of National Council work with the youth organizations amongst the grassroots to assist them to formulate their projects so that they can benefit from these programs. Apart from this, the state of Senegal gives a great deal of attention to the development of agricultural projects for youth and for women. And also, we are involved because in these programs at the level of the steering committees and what we call guidance committees, the youth are represented by the National Youth Council of Senegal. Now, with regards to your second question, the participation of youth in decision-making bodies, that is pivotal. And it is the fight of all youth organizations in Senegal, but National Youth Council of Senegal, in collaboration with all youth organizations, we have tabled before the government a draft bill asking for a quota of 30% youth in all elective posts, because we represent over 60% of the population of Senegal, and we cannot have programs elaborated or achieve emergence without the involvement of the youth. For this reason, we have adopted this bill. What we expect from donors is to assist youth organizations so that we can be integrated into these decision-making bodies to be dignifiedly being involved, because you cannot come up with programs for the youth without the youth. For this reason, with these draft programs, we need to have all youth organizations involved, because whenever we have a project or a program, we are just asked to have a delegate. And we think that that is not enough. What we want is to have at least 30% representation of youth in all these decision-making institutions within territorial collectivities, within the regions, and within decision-making bodies. And I think that as an organization, we would like to thank the state for its efforts, but we call upon the state to invest more in agriculture, to invest more in funding of youth projects, but we cannot attain emergence without attaining reaching 60% of the population. Thank you. If you want to have a youth that creates wealth for development. Thank you, Mr. Habib. We have understood what you said. Major programs in Senegal, and a lot of questions have come to you. Maybe we can give you the floor after to address question. How do we ensure that these programs that you have talked about that are beneficial to the youth? We know that you have lots of youth who are involved in policy formulation. How do you ensure that 30% of youth that you have asked for, that they be involved at the decision-making level?
Question will be like, how do we ensure that all these opportunities, there are a lot of programs. Honorable Christopher mentioned some, Honorable Jacqueline mentioned also some, and then we just had a long list of programs happening, being implemented in Senegal that target young people and ensuring gender equity. But the question is, how do we ensure that all those opportunities that the most vulnerable, I mean, women, young people, and girls don't miss them? So maybe I'll give the chance about that one question. There was also a question asked by our colleague Leonida from Kenya about the need to extend agriculture to other countries that might address the need of the small farmers. And also there are some other question. I'll come out to that. Maybe if our colleague Christopher is around, just the question about this dialogue. You hear this experience from Uganda, from Honorable, from Mr. Kamutima, and then from Mr. Hardiop. Honorable Christopher, what's your take on that? How do we ensure that young people really, and women also, have the chance to be there when decisions are being taken, particularly in the COVID-19 response? Honorable Christopher? Madam Jacqueline, Honorable Jacqueline, I hope you are still with us. The question is asked now. How do we ensure that young people and girls are there when decisions are being taken? We know there are a lot of experiences that you'll be having there with support from FAO. How do we ensure this concrete? How do we make it happen? Honorable Jacqueline, are you with us? Or if someone in the audience would like to intervene, please, the floor is open. You can just raise your hands and we can give you the chance to intervene as well. Okay, maybe we give the chance to Tima. As a young people, you had a long experience in Senegal. I would like to know concretely what are the steps that need to be taken to ensure that anytime the Uganda Parliament is making a decision on agriculture or COVID-19 response, that young people's voice, young people are there.
Thank you very much. For me, my approach is that as young people, we have to get organized and demand what belongs to us. For example, when we are organized, I have always shared this experience because of organizing ourselves into a network. We have been able to get a lot of opportunities to be engaged at a national level, even at international level. So for me, I always call upon the young people to come up with their demands, organize themselves into maybe networks, into advocacy groups, and then demand for their space. And this space is available. To me, I always say it is all about young people organizing themselves. That's what I see, but still again, it will be hard for these spaces to be achieved. I mean, it will be hard for young people to get into these spaces if they are operating in silos. So there is also a need to work together as young people, different advocacy organizations at a national level. We need to create one platform whereby we can always come up with clear issues so that we engage the government, we engage the parliament, and be able to be heard. Yeah, that is what I think can work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramontibe. That was very concrete. Monsieur Diop, on est à la fin, vraiment juste 2 minutes.
Mr. Job, we're at the end, 2 minutes. You have a lot of programs and measures adopted by Senegal. You said that these are very important. Tell me, concrete actions that are carried out by your council to ensure that you are represented at the decision-making level and gender sensitivity is complied with. What concrete actions has Senegal taken? At the National Council, you know that when we go to a commune, we can say that the commune is at the grassroots level. And what we call the National Council, Youth Council, well, all the actions that we carried out within that commune is the youth are represented, even at the level of departments, at the level of regions, and the same applies at national level. As we speak, in all programs that we are carrying out in Senegal, the youth are represented, but the representation is weak. It is insufficient when we are asked to send one representative to events, whereas we want to have at least a minimum 30% of the representation. And we have tabled this before the government. We have tabled a bill requiring 30% representation of youth in all elective posts in the country and for all projects and programs as regards youth. This is a concrete step. Now the youth are represented, but we want to have 30% representation. That is what we want. That is very interesting. These presence and these diversity. So what you are doing to have a presence at the level of the regions to be represented and presence in the communes, within the grassroots and at the level of the National Youth Council, we have what we call parity. One man, one woman, one girl, one boy. So one boy, one girl. So that's how we operate. For every boy, you have a girl, and for every man, you have a woman. Parity. That's what we call it. It seems as if we have lost our moderator today. We were not very lucky. We have come to the end. We have very little time. We will invite Kali Smaller, who's the director of Agriculture, Trade and Investment at the IISD, to come and give the concluding remarks. She advised governments and parliamentarians on policies and foreign investment and agriculture. And she is highly committed. The conversation on youth must have disturbed her, and we'd like to hear her concluding remarks. Thank you, Karine. You have the floor.
And it's very nice to see a lot of familiar faces that we've seen in past years in our parliamentary projects. So some concluding remarks. Thank you to all of our speakers, to our moderator, to all of our organizers for a wonderful 2.5-hour session. I'm going to try and summarize and give some conclusions about what's been said today. I wanted to start off by acknowledging, even though we were talking about the action that parliamentarians need to take, I think we very clearly started, and it was mentioned throughout, that there's a big problem that we're facing here. And the problem that was spoken about was the problem of a growing youth population, a population of youth, women and men who are mostly engaged in the informal sector, who are in a vulnerable position when it's come to COVID, have been made more vulnerable because of COVID-19, a population that's growing, particularly in Africa, but also a population, whilst they seem to be lacking opportunities in general, are less and less interested in agriculture, and agriculture not being the attractive sector to provide these opportunities for this growing youth population. We heard a lot about how COVID has made things worse, particularly for women and young people. But yeah, I think the situation's been framed very much in terms of major problems that we need to challenge. But I think very quickly, and I think Elizabeth did this in the best way possible, we moved away from problems to hope and action. And I think the opening remarks of Robert Gere, for me, the most powerful message that he sent was that inclusive transformation of rural economies and food systems will not be possible without young women and young men. And I think that then set the tone for all the exciting ideas and action and innovation that came out of the discussion. We also heard from Francesca Dalla Valle at FAO about the hope that's come amid this pandemic of young entrepreneurs who have proved resilient and who have been able to rise above that vulnerability and that precarious situation to do exciting things in the agriculture sector. But I think most of what I want to conclude on or summarize is all the action that came out and all the ideas came out. And I think while there was a strong focus on parliamentary actions, I think what was quite interesting for me to hear was how any kind of parliamentary action that's taken place in the last few years has been supported through partnerships with non-parliamentary actors. So we saw a lot about the partnerships that have happened with the FAO, the partnerships that have happened with youth organizations, the partnerships that have happened with farmers organizations, with civil society, with the private sector. This parliamentary action's been made possible or come alive through the partnerships that have existed. We heard a call from Elizabeth to say that a big thing that's needed in terms of action is incentives in the form of subsidies and tax breaks for the youth. We heard from Bogulo Kene Wendo about the need for better access to markets through trade agreements. She spoke about the Africa Free Trade Area. She spoke about the need to enable women and young people to take better advantage of cross-border trade and to remove the red tape that's undermining the possibility for these informal entrepreneurs, these micro and small and medium enterprises to be able to take advantage of trading opportunities. And then we heard a lot about this issue of voice, how to make sure that young people have a voice. And I think this came out throughout the presentation, but throughout the session, but most strongly at the end. So we started hearing about voice from our early panels where people were speaking about the need for stronger business groups, better business associations, agribusiness champions to champion the role of young people. But then we heard very clearly from Senegal that how to make this happen. So I think this very strong message about to have voice, you need representation, and one representative is not enough. And this effort in Senegal to have at least 30% of representatives of young people in all decision-making bodies concerning youth, I think sounds very, very promising as a way to ensure that voice happens. But also Kamutima spoke about the importance of networks as a huge tool to enable voice. So even if you're not being given the legislative right to a voice, if you organize yourselves in networks, you organize your message, you use those networks to articulate your message and your ask and your ideas, it's a really important way to get voice. We heard quite a bit about how to make agriculture, food systems, rural areas attractive to youth. So there was a lot of efforts on policy reforms, on strategies, on initiatives. We heard from the congressman in the Philippines about this Forever initiative, very much about bringing people back to agriculture and making agriculture attractive and exciting for young people. We heard about the policies in Uganda to try and inspire young people back to agriculture. And then we heard about the really important role that the parliament in Uganda is playing to drive policy reform, youth strategies, to ensure that there's a strong research agenda that makes sure all these ideas are backed by evidence, and importantly, to improve the statistics so that we know who to target, how to target, and what their needs are. I think I will probably end there. I want to thank enormously all of our honorable guests, our panelists, ladies and gentlemen, all the messages that were sent around in the chat, either challenging some of these messages or confirming what was needed. It's been a highly engaged and active webinar, and we will be, as ISD, FAO, Oxfam, the ECOWAS Parliament, taking these ideas and seeing how can we keep this energy going and resolve some of the problems that we've identified. Thank you.
Francine or myself, thank you very much, Madam Karine, for such an amazing synthesis of what happened throughout this session. I myself very much appreciated the multi-stakeholder dialogue that we had today, and I think something we should keep continuing. And please, ISD, Oxfam, and FAO support this type of dialogue. I think this is an amazing opportunity. We need to keep conversation, discussing among ourselves. And again, our thoughts and prayer with our colleagues in Philippines. And it was again an honor. Thank you very much, Osfam ISDFO, for giving me this chance to help moderate this session, even though a lot of technical hurdles here and there. I hope to see you soon, very, very, very soon, somewhere, maybe in the field, somewhere in Manila or in Uganda. So thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Francine. Thank you for the amazing presentation. À très, très bientôt. Bye-bye. Francine, over to you.
Francine, à vous.
So thank you, Karine. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, everybody. So we are also inviting you to send comments, and we will be delighted to have another parliamentarian dialogue in the coming days. So we keep you updated, and thank you, everybody, for your participation.